As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. The average American, they say, soft and decadent. He'll become paralyzed with fear and panic. He'll run away and hide and do nothing to interfere as they strike at the community's power centers. Any all-out revolution must create a state of crisis wherein almost all of the male population would be forced to remain in their homes because of its affluence. It has waxed soft. The motive force behind its life drive is its endless pursuit of prestige, conspicuous consumption, and sensual pleasure. After the stage is properly set, America could be brought to her knees in 90 days. Ladies and gentlemen, the organization behind these preparations has almost unlimited financial resources. Our enemies are deadly serious about their task, and it's nothing short of national suicide for us to continue to ignore their plans and their progress. The strategy calls for the quiet conversion of our government. Those who run the government will know who is to get something and who has to wait, and that represents control over human beings. They have one and only one solution for all problems: more government, and then more and more until it's total government. In 1943, the following directive was issued from party headquarters. It read, "When certain obstructionists become too irritating, label them after suitable build-ups as fascist. Label them as fascist or Nazi or anti-Semitic, and use the prestige of anti-fascist and tolerance organizations to discredit them. In the public mind, constantly associate those who oppose us with those names which already have a bad smell. The association will, after enough repetition, become fact in the public mind."
Strapped in greed and all the green belts wrapped around our minds, and endless red tape to keep the truth confined.
Everybody, welcome. It's Armor of Truth Live number 197. Let's give some credit to that cover song. Well, that's Band Hub Mixer Pro over there on SoundCloud. We'll get a link to that in the description. And that's what it is, folks. It's an uprising. Welcome to the show. It's Armor of Truth Live number 197. At long last, here we are. We're back. And today we're going to be talking about just what you saw G. Edward Griffin talking about there in, I think that's 1969. Now, he's speaking specifically about the movement that was afoot then. It's not much different now, let's be honest about it. Same tactics. There's nothing new under the sun when it comes to ways of subverting nations, communities. The devil has no new tricks. He just has different people that he uses. So we're going to be talking today about this new situation in Italy where there's a new face on the scene. Do we trust it? Is it real? Does it even really represent us? We're going to find out about that. Let me let you have a little clip from the new Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. This is the clip that really got everything stirring as soon as she was elected. This is going to be subtitled, so you'll have to pay attention to that. But check out what she says here and what her platform seems to be. Yeah, it's not going to work, is it? Here we go.
Fa così paura. C'è una risposta unica per tutte queste domande. Perché ci definisce, perché è la nostra identità. Perché tutto quello che ci definisce in questo tempo è un nemico. Per chi vorrebbe che non avessimo più un'identità e che fossimo solamente schiavi, consumatori perfetti. E allora è sotto attacco l'identità nazionale, è sotto attacco l'identità religiosa, è sotto attacco l'identità di genere, è sotto attacco l'identità familiare. Non devo potermi definire italiana, cristiana, donna, madre, no. Io devo essere cittadino X, genere X, genitore 1, genitore 2, devo essere un numero. Perché quando sarò solamente un numero, quando non avrò più un'identità, quando non avrò più radici, beh, allora sarò lo schiavo perfetto in balia della grande speculazione finanziaria, il consumatore perfetto. E questa è la ragione per la quale oggi noi facciamo tanta paura. Questa è la ragione per la quale oggi questo appuntamento fa tanta paura. Perché noi non vogliamo essere dei numeri, noi siamo qui per dire che noi non siamo dei numeri, noi difenderemo il valore della persona umana, di ogni singola persona umana, perché ognuno di noi ha un codice genetico unico e irripetibile. E questo, piaccia o no, ha del sacro. Lo difenderemo Dio, la patria e la famiglia, che fanno tanto schifo a qualcuno. Lo faremo per difendere la nostra libertà, perché noi non saremo mai schiavi e semplici consumatori in balia della speculazione finanziaria. Ecco la nostra missione, ecco perché oggi sono venuta qui. Scriveva Chesterton ormai più di un secolo fa, vediamo se ve lo trovo, fuochi verranno attizzati per dimostrare che 2 più 2 fa 4, spade verranno sguainate per dimostrare che le foglie sono verdi in estate. Quel tempo è arrivato, signori, siamo pronti. Grazie.
All right, so that's inspiring stuff, right? It is. That's inspiring stuff, right? What do we make of that? She just announced everything that is what we stand for. We're going to talk about this in great detail. But I would invite you today, those of you who have been viewers of this channel for a while, those of you who might be new, those of you who are very much attached to the truth movement, I want to invite you, I want to suggest today, don't be black-pilled today and just assume that everything going on out there is somehow a ruse, a gambit to trick me. All right, let's consider this. Let's consider this objectively, but through the proper lens. All right, and that's what our goal is to always do here. That's our purpose. All right, so before we get started on this today, let's give an update because there is a more pressing piece of news that's going on right now, and that is the hurricane that's just hit the Gulf Coast of Florida. And weather.com, the latest on that. Multiple reports of people trapped by this they're calling a historic storm. What's interesting, though, is it seems like every storm is a historic storm now. Whether it is or not, that's definitely how it's reported. 2.5 million people without power right now. So we just want to make sure that we acknowledge this, and that we, that as brothers and sisters in Christ, that we're remembering these folks in prayer, because there's the whole region is affected, and whatever you think's going on here, whether you think there's weather warfare at work here, or whether you don't, what we know for sure is that there are real people affected by this. So let's keep them in our thoughts, and yes, in our prayers as well, because that's the power. That is the power. Later today, my wife Summer and I are going to go check out this documentary by it's about Sean Feucht. Now we would definitely have some theological differences with Sean Feucht and the general movement involved here, a general arm of Christianity. But there's another message here that's also relevant, and that is tyranny. So we'll be able to give you a full report on this after we've seen it later today. This is the opening day of it. I'll let you. Let's look at the trailer for it, so you can get an idea of exactly what it is.
America.
So once again, right, it's inspiring stuff, right? And well, it's always good to whenever you feel your emotions being engaged, that's a good time to be careful. That's a good time to be vigilant. So we're going to check this out and see what it's about. I mean, certainly, we would definitely stand on the same side and in support of what they were fighting for there, which was the freedom to meet and worship, and then right under that, the freedom to move around, to just be free, just basic liberty, and that's what's at stake. That is why Giorgia Meloni, that's why her party is so popular right now. And of course, what we're going to talk about today is the narrative and the language, as you heard G. Edward Griffin mention at the open of the show. Anytime there is an uprising or someone who appears to be talking sense, the establishment and its screeching cronies are very quick to attach terms that smell bad, as Griffin said there. Attach anything to them you can that stinks, so that the rest of the masses won't take it seriously. So we'll get into that in just a second. One more point here is, as we get started, here's a story that came across just today. It's a couple days old, but this is a Pennsylvania pro-life activist arrested by FBI, charged with assaulting clinic escort. Now, there's people that wait outside Planned Parenthood or abortion clinics to walk people in and out so that they won't feel intimidated by the Christians who are there preaching the gospel or trying to talk these women out of this choice. So that's what this man was doing. And he would go there a couple times. He would go there a couple days a week, about 6 to 8 hours a time. And what happened was, just to summarize it, he was arrested. The FBI. It says here that it was the FBI that actually came to his home, pounded on the door with weapons, and arrested him. Now the story, what his wife has reported, is that it was, she said they were going to break in the door if I didn't open it, and they had about 5 guns pointed at my husband and myself and basically my kids. And but spokesman for the FBI said no, there was no SWAT team there. It was the FBI. Says there are inaccurate claims being made regarding the arrest of Mark Houck, is this man's name. No SWAT team or SWAT operators were involved. FBI agents knocked on Mr. Houck's door, identified themselves. So anyway, so there are conflicting stories about the details. But what did happen was this. There is a federal law now. And I'll share that with you right here. There was a 72-year-old man outside the abortion clinic, and he just identified as BL. And he was serving as one of these escorts, escorting women in and out. And there was an altercation. The defendant, Houck, here, according to the claim, shoved this 72-year-old man to the ground, and is also Houck is accused of verbally confronting BL and forcibly shoving him to the ground. Now, as they say, assault is always a serious offense. This is the statement from the officials, from the authorities. But under the FACE Act, F-A-C-E, the FACE Act, it is, if the victim is targeted because of their association with a reproductive health care clinic, it's a federal crime. Our office and Department of Justice are committed to prosecuting crimes which threaten the safety and rights of all individuals. Well, they would like to protect the safety and the rights of all individuals except those who are too small to protect themselves. That's where the line is drawn there. So this FACE Act is a federal law now, where if you're interfering in any way on the premises of an abortion clinic, they'll call them reproductive health care facilities. See, the war on language is alive and well there. So if what happened here was there was earlier on, this case was tried. It didn't even make it to court. It was thrown out. It was thrown out by the local authorities there. But what she said was that the husband had shoved this man who had gotten into the face of his son. He took his 12-year-old son there with him sometimes. So the rest of the story seems to be like there was a confrontation between his young son and this older man. And he was defending the honor of his son, perhaps. There's conflicting stories there. But what did happen was in something that seems like not a very serious altercation, this man could go to jail for 11 years because it's a federal crime. And after they threw the case out in the local courts there, the district court threw the case out earlier this summer. It was picked up by Merrick Garland's Department of Justice. That's the same group the same Merrick Garland who issued was responsible for the raid at Trump's house. So, yeah, the Houck faces a maximum of 11 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, fines of up to $350,000. So, wherever the sacrament of abortion is happening, now there's a federal law for those who go there and want to preach the gospel or offer alternatives to the women who show up there. You have to be even more careful. Someone could trick you. Someone could pull you into an altercation and suddenly you're facing 11 years. Now, it doesn't work the other way. If you happen to be one of these escorts and you attack someone else who's there it doesn't work that way, because that, unless you're there as in some way representing or supporting the clinic, then you have this federal protection. So again, more of that. That's what we're here to talk about today, is this overall idea. Now let's get back to Giorgia Meloni. Now here she is speaking with a little more gusto. That was plenty gusto earlier, but listen to this.
Non me lo toglierete! Io sono Giorgia, sono una donna, sono una madre, sono italiana, sono cristiana, non me lo toglierete! Non me lo toglierete!
So now that sounds with a little more force. I'm Georgia, I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm Italian, I'm a Christian. You can't take that away from me. So let's talk about her just a little bit. By the way, I guess, we've been looking for a while now for someone to define what a woman is. Well, we have a candidate. I think we have a candidate here. So the movement is about God, country, and family. So let's preface everything we're going to talk about today with this comment. We know that that's the right message. God, country, family. Or God, family, country. Some could argue, but God is in that supreme position. Priorities seem to be correct there. It's the right message, but we have to be very careful. Very careful that it doesn't become a slogan. God, family, country. Doesn't become a slogan for what we think we want, for what we think is right, for what we believe ought to happen. It shouldn't become a slogan for what we feel is right. If the movement truly holds God first, then we have to define what is meant when someone uses that word, God. Because family and country and our convictions and our positions on everything else in life will flow necessarily from that definition. It does no one any good to be touting, proclaiming a generic God. As A.W. Tozer said, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. The history of mankind will probably show that no people has ever risen above its religion, and man's spiritual history will positively demonstrate that no religion has ever been greater than its idea of God. So that means that worship will be true or false. It will be pure or base, based on that definition that you hold of God, as the worshiper entertains high or low thoughts of God. And it's because of this, the gravest question is always, what do you think, know, believe about God? As Tozer says, the most portentous fact about any man is not what at a given time he may say or do, or a woman, what she may say or do or proclaim openly, but what that man or woman deep in their heart conceives about God. We tend by our nature to move toward our mental image of God. So this is true not only of the individual Christian, but of the company of Christians that compose the church as well. Always the most revealing thing about the person or the church is their idea about God. Now, C.S. Lewis also spoke to this. He answered back to Tozer here by saying that he had read of this statement, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. He said, it is not. How God thinks of us is not only more important, but infinitely more important. Indeed, how we think of him It's of no importance except insofar as it is related to how he thinks of us. He says, it is written that we shall stand before him. We shall appear and be inspected. The promise of glory is the promise almost incredible and only possible by the work of Christ and Christ alone. That some of us, that any of us who really chooses, shall actually survive that examination, shall find approval, shall please God. To please God, to be a real ingredient in the divine happiness, to be loved by God, not merely pitied, but delighted in, as an artist delights in his work, or a father delights in his son. It seems impossible. A weight or burden of glory which our thoughts can hardly sustain, but it is so. So we can learn a lot from both of those statements. Tozer is really commenting on this kind of situation. When someone is using that word, when someone is using the name of God, what do they really mean? And, of course, Lewis is correct, too, in saying that it is God who moves first. It is God who changes the heart. Now, before we dive into the meat of the show today, I've got to let you know, of course, some of you who watch here regularly would notice that we've been less active here for a couple weeks, and that is because, as I said in the show the other night, we've had some medical emergencies in our family, and we would ask if you would keep us in your prayers for that. As we work through that, it requires our time because family will be first, and that will always be the case. So we've done fewer shows recently. It's required the time of Summer and myself to be serving and be sacrificing. So we just want to let you know that's what's going on here. We haven't just fallen off and taken a vacation. We want to, in an effort to be transparent, but not to, also to maintain some privacy. We want to let you know that that's what's going on. And we've also, if you notice, the comments are turned off and the live chat isn't on. And I'll make this statement one more time, and then we'll probably leave it alone. We get a lot of, we still get emails from people criticizing us for not having a live chat or turning the comments off, saying that we're censoring people, saying that we're participating in censorship. That's not the case. This is not a real community. YouTube is not your blog. You're allowed to go anywhere you want and say what you want, but this is not that. That's not what this is. And more importantly, you don't need to be looking at it. You don't need to be thinking of it as though this is a real community. It's not. Communities online can be edifying. They can be fruitful. They're good and useful in many ways. Talked about this on the show that we did last Saturday night, late in the night. I encourage you to watch that one. But as Summer reminded me last week, and that's why we wanted to make this comment today, that what she said about that really put an impression on my mind, and it's what we need to say to you. Sometimes YouTube channels, blogs, online personalities and ministries, especially when there are forums and comment sections and live chats, can become distractions. In fact, they can enable people to opt out of the in-person gathering. So we're not interested in that at all. We're not here to build a YouTube community. Not at all. If that happens, that's nice. That would be great. In fact, if that's going to happen, it's going to happen over on our website. That's going to be our hub. That's where we want people to come find us. But this is not a replacement for in-person study and worship with other Christians. I'm not your pastor. I'm not qualified. I'm not trying to be that. You need to be under the authority of a godly, chosen leader right there in your town, in your community, so that you can be under authority, so that you can be safe. Look, let's just be honest, so that you can be safe. This is a crazy world right now. It is really in a state like has never been seen before in history. This is not the time to be twisting in the breeze on your own. So just to say that, this is these online communities, they make it easier for people to seek out what they want to hear, right? And we see that happen here a lot. When we stay with the truth, my friends. We're not deviating. We're not here to come tell you what we think you want to hear or what's going to make you feel good. We stay with the truth. And that irks people sometimes. And we hear about it. We hear about it often. But we're not here to tell you what you want to hear. That's what can happen in these things. People can seek out what they want, and they'll only listen to voices who repeat the things they like to listen to. Right? So it becomes a nice, comfortable diversion from reality rather than being about Christ and his gospel. And so that's what this is about. This is about Jesus Christ, his atoning death on the cross for our sins, and his rising from the dead in victory over all that, so that we would have access to that salvation, so that we would have access to that power of forgiveness, fellowship, right here and right now, as we live with and interact with and love and have to forgive one another quite often. So that's what this is about. That and nothing else, so that's clear. All right. Now, back to Giorgia Meloni. She became Italy's first female prime minister this week in a party called the Brothers of Italy National Alliance. Now, that's the piece there that's going to cause a lot of controversy, because there are links to fascism in the past. This is true. We're going to talk about that. We're not going to sidestep that. We're going to take it head on, and we'll get to it when we get there. But here are the details. This is the country's furthest move to the right. When you hear the term far right, when they're talking about European politics, specifically here in Italy, you have to understand that term far right doesn't mean the same thing that it means in the press here in the United States. Here, far right is used as a pejorative term to, kind of like terrorist. It's kind of, I have to be careful saying those words on there, but kind of like that word. So in Italian politics, it's not the same. There are far right parties, center right parties, center left, and far left parties. That's just how they're known. But anyway, the conservative movement in Italy and all of Europe, in fact, has seen a massive rise in popularity since the last election in 2018. This government will have a majority in both houses. We'll have an opportunity to really make some change if the globalist order, the European Union, doesn't intervene and impede. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Italy has several political parties, and it's a standard practice for parties to campaign in an alliance together to form a government. More on this in a moment. These alliances frequently fall apart. Since World War II, the temperamental environment of the political landscape has led to 68 different governments in 76 years. Once all votes are counted up, it is up to the president to elect a prime minister. Kind of like here with an electoral college, we would go and vote, but ultimately those electors, it's up to them to decide whether they want to cast their vote for their region with the will of the people in mind or not. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Meloni has now won, and in a process that really took about a month to get it all done. Now, Italy is Europe's largest economy. And Meloni campaigned on this motto of God, family, and homeland. God, family, and country. Traditional family models, limiting so-called reproductive rights, as we saw in this story earlier. The abortion is called a reproductive right now. It's just the use of softening language away from the truth. Right? It's running as fast as you can away from the truth, using terms like that. But she is standing in opposition to even that terminology. She stands for a Christian-based culture. And she stands for ending the forced migrations. Right? Immigration policy is something that people talk about an awful lot. And they'll say things like, well, these people are fascists. They don't want immigrants coming to their country at all. It's not really the case. What's happening is the movement, the agenda for the 21st century is pushing migrants all over the place, forcing it. They're forcing it. We know this is happening. That's not a secret. But in a speech earlier this year, she stated her position plainly. She said, yes to the natural family. That means no gay marriage. She says yes to the natural family, yes to sexual identity, right? Not this amorphous. You're not allowed to use your actual pronouns. Yes to sexual identity. Yes to secure borders. No to international bankers controlling the world. No to the LGBT lobby. No to gender ideology, and no to mass migration. So popularity of the conservative movement skyrocketed recently as Italians and Europeans in general, of course, have seen enough in the last several years of soaring energy prices for one thing, and these ever-deepening encroachments on their basic liberties that everyone has seen over the past 2 or 3 years. Now, Italy is no libertarian stronghold, right? So this swing to the right is definitely a statement of some kind. Now, as we've been saying all along here, it's definitely wise to keep your expectations tempered and give the lady some time to see if she is, in fact, who she says she is. She has an uphill battle in front of her. The truth of the matter is that while it is a strong statement for the moment, it's good to see the new world lockdown, mask up utopians scrambling as fast as they can to defame her with as many pejoratives as they can muster up. Still yet, retaining power in Italy is not ever usually very long-lived. A typical government lasts about 400 days. So let's just pump the brakes, keep everything in perspective. So after she won the election, on election night, she sent a message of unity, and you've heard some of that. She says, if we're called upon to govern this nation, we will do so for all Italians with the aim of uniting the people, to make them proud of being Italians, to wave the Italian flag. She says, you chose us and we will not betray you. Now, let's talk a little bit more about this Brothers of Italy party that she is a member of, the one that's getting all of the attention. It dates back to the Italian social movement, the MSI, that formed in place of the National Fascist Party, which was banned after World War II. Although she claims fascism is in the past, she has praised Mussolini before. Mussolini was a dictator at the helm of Italy between 1925 and 1945. He took up an alliance with Adolf Hitler, for one thing. She praised him for being a good politician when she did an interview back in the 1990s. All right, these are comments she made back in the 1990s, right after she first joined this party. Now, as you might expect, many reports are saying that the rise of a far-right leader could alarm some of Italy's neighbors who are more inclined to the left. So for example, before Russia invaded Ukraine, she spoke quite favorably of Vladimir Putin. Obviously, that would alarm pro-Ukraine European allies, the whole European Union, that would alarm for sure. You're not allowed to have an opinion these days unless it matches up with, the official, accepted, approved opinion. But she has softened that tone a bit since the war kicked off, and ever since the world media narrative established that anyone challenging the black and white notion of this good and evil, that Zelensky is a heroic king of an innocent realm, while Putin is obviously the dastardly villain of the dark side, seeking the ruin of the earth. So she did soften that a bit. And as a politician, I imagine you would have to. So I want to share with you what George Millenberger, he is an American living in Australia, Christian man, writing on these topics. Writing for Cauldron Pool, a trusted source we use quite a bit here. He says, now as to her actual election, the state of play is this. Italy has several political parties, and it's standard practice, as we said, for them to come together in an alliance. There's not just two big parties. There are many parties, and they will get together in an alliance to try to form a government. And as we said earlier, they fall apart fast, 68 different governments in 76 years. And it's up to the president, once all the votes come in, it's up to the president to elect the prime minister. So it's a little more complicated than it would seem. She's being called a dangerous far-right politician, and the left are shaking in their jackboots, that's for sure. She has been unashamed to affiliate with the likes of Donald Trump. And here comes the important part for our talk today. She also associates with Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. She has made it clear that she will resist the radical trans and homosexual agendas and put family policy first. Yet she's still condemned as a fascist and a modern-day Mussolini. One person who should know about these matters is Nicholas Farrell, who has written a biography on Benito Mussolini. He said this in an interview. It is indisputable that the Brothers of Italy, that's her political party, are the heirs to Mussolini, in the sense that the party was founded in 2012 by Meloni and others who had been members of the neo-fascist Movimento Sociale Italiano, the MSI, which was set up in 1946 by former fascists. In 1995, MSI became Alleanza Nazionale and rejected fascism. In 1995, MSI changed their name to Alleanza, the National Alliance, and rejected fascism. Its then leader served as foreign minister and president of the Chamber of Deputies in successive Berlusconi governments, the former leader. Meloni says, I have no problem confronting this. When we founded Brothers of Italy, we founded it as the center-right, with its head held high. She says, when I am something, I declare it, which you've seen her do. She's not afraid to declare she's a Christian. She says, when I'm something, I declare it. I never hide. If I were fascist, I would say that I am fascist. Instead, I have never spoken of fascism because I am not a fascist. Okay. Well, that's from her, right? That's her speaking. So, biographer Nicholas Farrell continues here. He says, she regards herself and Brothers of Italy as owing more to the late British conservative philosopher Roger Scruton than to the revolutionary socialist Mussolini. In her speeches, she often quotes from Scruton. She says, in many things, he was so passionate about, from art and music to wine and being a country gentleman. He always knew how to embody the essence of conservatism as a way of life and never as an ideology, she tells me. She says, I believe that the big challenge today globally, not only in Italy, but is in between those who defend identity and those who do not. That is what Scruton meant when he said that if you destroy something, you do not necessarily do something new and better. You don't. It's because you've destroyed something. That doesn't mean something good's going to come. That's why revolution is not always the answer. She says, I'd probably be a Tory if I were British, but I'm Italian. Another source of inspiration for Meloni, Farrell points out here, she also is inspired by another giant of conservative thought, J.R.R. Tolkien. Every January the 3rd, she marks his birthday on her Facebook page, which has 2.3 million followers. And this year she wrote about J.R.R. Tolkien. He brought up so many of us with his stories, so rich in values and meanings. If you're not aware, underlying Tolkien's work is a Christian worldview, which taught us to believe and to dream. Farrell says, she tells me that before we met, she imagined that I would look like Tolkien. So on and on a little bit about that. She says, The Lord of Rings is not a book that teaches you something. It's a book that helps you discover who you are, which is something else. Above all, Tolkien has given me this understanding that power is not a conquest, but an enemy. Did you catch that? Power is not something to gain or a conquest, but power is an enemy. A problem that you must keep under control on a leash. Now that seems to me, you would only make that statement if you understood, if you had a proper biblical anthropology, you understood the true state of the heart of man. As to her pro-family stance, she is accused of having a naked reactionary agenda. It seems because of her hostility to illegal immigrants and to woke ideology, which in a speech in America earlier in the year, she blamed for, among other things, destroying the foundations of the natural family. And that's another term, comes up a lot, the natural family. By that, she means one man, one woman, a father and a husband. A father and a husband, a father and a husband and a wife. See how that works when you're in this culture for too long? Meloni now accepts, she says, Meloni now accepts gay civil unions, which have been legal in Italy since 2016, but opposes gay adoption. So there's a little contradiction there, but she says that a child has the right to a father and a mother. She opposes gender politics in schools. I would say there's a contradiction there in how she looks at accepting gay civil unions. I guess if you're speaking about the law there, whatever, but we have to have a clear black and white stance on that. And I imagine in politics, I guess you still can't do that. But we'll see what happens. But as far as adoption, she's not in favor of same-sex couples adopting. She opposes gender politics in schools and what she calls Italian English. She calls it La LGBT lobby. A passionate, occasionally manic speaker, as you heard, she famously shouted at a rally in Rome in 2019, as you heard that, they want to call us parent one, parent two, with no gender. Gender, LGBT or whatever, citizen X with code numbers, but we're not code numbers and we'll defend our identity. She said, I am Georgia, I am a woman, I am a mother, I am Italian, I am Christian. You will not take that away from me. And that speech went viral and was even made into a disco dance track, which became a hit. All right, so that's that speech that Meloni gave at the World Congress of Families in March 2019 is one that's well worth watching. There's also here the World Congress of Families. I'll show you this website right quick if we can get there without using up too much of our time. It's the World Congress of Families, and it was 2019. I just want to show you some of the... You'll be able to understand a little bit about what's going on here when you see this. So just in the search, exposed the World Congress of Families, held conferences and events around the world that foster homophobia and transphobia under the guise of protecting the natural family. The Southern Poverty Law Center has them identified as a hate group. And here's their website, World Congress of Families. Now it's a bit interfaith, but let's keep thinking about that. They said we want to go back to the past, as she says that they've claimed about her, that this is just, you're taking us backwards in time. You're taking us back to, I don't know why it's always assumed that going back is the wrong thing to do, but that's the progressive, right? That if obviously they're progressive, they don't want to go back. They said it's scandalous for people to defend the natural family founded on marriage, to want to increase the birth rate. We've talked about that here, right? The more atheism grows, the further we get away from Christian worldview in our nation, the fewer children we create. And isn't that the goal of the globalists? Population control. We won't survive. Our nation won't survive unless we can keep our birth rate at above 2.1 children per family. So what do same-sex couples and career mothers and all of these other progressive ideas, what do they actually do to a nation over time? Ultimately, they destroy it. It's a logical conclusion of it all. She says, I think the ones who want to go back to the past are those trying to bring back censorship by trying to stop an event like this from taking place. I think it is unenlightened when a state that is usually willing to sponsor any old thing, even exhibitions featuring a crucifix immersed in a beaker of urine, is ashamed to sponsor an event like this. And those are some of the contradictions that we see. Here's the World Congress of Families. Upcoming speakers. Here we go. Southern Poverty Law Center had them pegged, as a hate group. So you could do a search for these if you'd like. No problem to find that. It's all there. She says, I say the losers are those who, without nothing better to do than come here and insult us while we talk about what we can do for the Italian family. But above all, I say the embarrassing ones are not us. The embarrassing ones are those who support practices like surrogacy, abortion at 9 months, right? And blocking the development of children with drugs at 11 years of age. Those are the hormone blockers she's talking about here. She says that is embarrassing. Boy, it's hard to disagree with her there, isn't it? And then in February of 2020, there was the National Conservative Conference in Rome, and that's where you heard the speech earlier, where she was really had all that gusto. The National Conservative Conference of Rome in 2020. Let's look at that. I want to show you some of the speakers because that'll help you understand who we're dealing with. What is this? Where is she showing up? And with whom? So you can see here at the National Conservatism here conference in Rome 2020, Rod Dreher, someone whose book, now Rod is Eastern Orthodox. We've had his book here, Live Not by Lies, and we've gleaned much great information and guidance from that book. So Rod Dreher, solid man. Now, when we say this, let's be clear about what we're saying. We're speaking here in terms of co-belligerents. Right? We're not talking about people that we necessarily share the same faith with. right? We would have definite theological issues, differences, core differences with Rod Dreher, but on a different focus when we're trying to find allies to take up causes where we can both come together on something like abortion or these issues that we've just mentioned. You know, as long as we're not getting involved in actually trying to do ministry together, because that would be confusing to the people looking on. All right, so there's the explanation there. And of course, Douglas Murray. Now, Douglas Murray, once again, you see, is a co-belligerent in these issues, homosexual man, but he is far more conservative than a lot of conservatives. So there's, these issues are complex. It's not complex and difficult to understand when you're talking about the gospel. All right. But here we're talking about how do we interact with those other people in the world who would like to see sanity brought back to our nations. And of course, there's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, mentioned earlier. She says, our patriotism is the will to defend our homelands from the great challenges of our age, challenges that will mark the future and the very survival of our civilization, and which we have to face together. The division between extreme nationalisms is as bad as the weakness of ill-defined supranational entities such as the European Union. So, ill-defined supranational entities such as the European Union. So, the rhetoric anyway is anti-globalist or pro-nationalist, more accurately. The only possible answer must be the alliance of homelands that believe in a common destiny. It is this vision that has led us to join the great family of the European conservatives, the idea of a new Europe as a confederation of sovereign nation states capable of cooperating on important matters, while remaining free to take decisions regarding matters affecting our daily lives. Essentially, that would mean the authority belongs to the people of each nation. Globalists hate that. New Agers hate that. They feel that it's time for us to ascend into unity. But they don't have any unity, is the contradiction. It's the funny part about that. She says, I have an image in mind, President Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II walking in the gardens of the president's residence in Florida back in 1987. It is the image of two great men walking together along the path of history. So we would take some issues, again, theologically, even culturally there, but let's continue. In that brief period in the 20th century, that was to change the world very shortly thereafter, thanks also to them with the collapse of communism. Remembering them here today is not simply to pay tribute to them, it is a warning. It is a commitment not to betray their dream of freedom, which is ours too. So she's a populist. That's what that means. When you're calling yourself a Christian and you're proclaiming God, family, and country, but you're not very specific on your definition of those terms, that's a lot like Donald Trump. Populism. So we have to be very careful with that. Doesn't mean they can't be our good leaders, and maybe they can. Maybe that's what this is. But as Christians, we always have to be filtering everything through the Scriptures, while at the same time knowing that we're in the world and we must engage it. In fact, that is the mission field. So we need to know who that we can actually work with in some of these secondary issues, right? Let's be clear about it. A lot of these issues that we mentioned are secondary. The primary issue is the gospel. It is the truth of who man is, who is mankind, who are you, what is our condition. It's that truth. and it's who is God. How do you define him? What do you mean when you say the term God? Where do you get your definition? She says it is Muhlenberger ends his article here saying it's early days yet, and we will have to wait and see how the new Italian leader proceeds. I would agree with that for sure. She and her party do take a hard line on immigration, and under her rule, we may see another Brexit or an Italexit, an Italexit, or Italy would leave the EU. She's been critical of the European Union and where it has been heading, so she may well bring the country out of its confines. A lot of people are tired of what they've seen over the past few years. So this very well could be a real organic uprising. Not a fascist one, but a real one, a real populist uprising. And folks, a populist uprising, that would be good for the church. That would be good for the church. It would be better for the church than the direction we're headed now. Muhlenberger says, I am quietly hopeful for what may transpire. With so many leftists running the show in Europe, it's good to see a conservative getting into office. Time will tell in terms of how she performs, but at the very least, we need to keep her in our prayers. At the same time, we need to keep all the other leaders, even the ones who are working against us, in our prayers as well. Take your lessons from the book of Daniel, all right, who he was certainly willing to pray for the kings that he served under. And they were mostly bad. They were mostly tyrants. But keep them in our prayers because, folks, that's what we do. Right? It's not our job to swallow the black pill and to stay out of it all, sit on the couch and watch it all play out, to stay out of the fray, to disengage from the culture, to disengage from politics altogether, as if, I've figured that out. That's all a game out there. It's all a manipulation. It's all a manipulation. Giorgia Meloni, she's a manipulation. That's a manipulation. That's a cynic. And that's not a healthy place to be. As if somehow we've all figured out exactly how the Illuminati works, exactly how the New World Order is set up, and we can see it in we know exactly. Nobody. No, you don't. You don't know that. And that's not in fact, it's not our job as Christians to understand the Illuminati at all of its levels. Right? It's this big thing that comes up here quite a bit. Jesus sends us out in the midst of wolves. In the midst of wolves who are intentional in their attacks. Wolves are not accidental when they attack with intention. And so that's the kind of opposition and persecution we come up against. But he commanded us to be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves. That doesn't mean to investigate every esoteric thing you find, to understand the darkness. Being wise as a serpent doesn't mean you need to know what the serpent knows. It just means that you need to be wise according to the Scriptures. You need to be, and gentle as doves means that we need to be willing to work with people. Right? We need to be willing and able to be, we don't want to be taken advantage of, but we need to be helpful. We must be helpful without being taken advantage of. And one way we can be helpful in this case, folks, is to pray for these world leaders. At a time like this, that is the answer. People are wondering, what are we going to do about this world? That's what you do about this world. You pray about it. And then you find out how you can be involved. So the European Union, now here's what's interesting. The European Union and the World Economic Forum and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, will they accept this result? Are they going to accept this result in Italy? Are they just going to take it? Well, that's unlikely, isn't it? This is when things like this happen, this is when they seek to change democracy. They're always talking about democracy, our democracy, protecting democracy, this democracy, that democracy. But when a democracy starts to blossom, they're the first ones there to snuff it out. The Italians are passionate people. They even embraced the Save the Planet Green narrative, just like their neighbors in Western Europe. What the people have mostly come to realize is that it was never about the climate, that the green dream was actually about soaring energy prices. It was about gender diversity. It was about open borders. And it was about a built-in loathing, a built-in hatred for all of Western civilization and the traditional concept of liberty. After all, according to the globalists, according to, where's my book? Here it is. This book that we've covered here in the past several months. We'll get back into this at some point when it's relevant. This is the follow-up to the Club of Rome's book. The Limits to Growth paper. It's the follow-up to that, written by Jorgen Randers. And in this book, he plainly states, and it's plainly stated over and all, that democracy moves too slow. It moves too slow, and that we need to, and you know, if we really want to take control, we've got to really press that point that the world's going to come to an end soon. If we allow democracy to, you know, the recent NASA DART mission to shoot the asteroid out of space. Isn't that adorable? Now we want people. It's clearly we want scientists to be looking to achieve greater and greater things. But they call that planetary defense, as if somehow, if God chose to pull His common grace away from this place and let it be destroyed, there's nothing you're going to do. You're not going to stop that. But anyway, that's one of the ways to look at that. That report is it's interesting. Is it real? You think it's real? I always have a little bit of suspicion when I see those, because the people who are reacting in the you know, you see in the videos and the reaction shots, they're all cheering. They don't act like scientists. They act more like a fraternity of some kind. But anyway, I don't want to get on that tangent right now. We've done that, and enough with that lately. But the point is here that the pendulum had to swing back in the other direction, as it always does. We've been jarred and pushed, shoved far to the left, and now the pendulum has to swing back. It was predictable. Now with Italians and more Europeans, since they've realized that the green dream is actually a nightmare, it's going to be interesting to see how far this new political paradigm plays out with the U.S. midterm elections right around the corner here in a month and a half or so. Because what we have is a new political paradigm. One of the points we want to make to you here today is that the old left-right paradigm is dead. That thing doesn't exist anymore. You can't think in those terms. With the anti-human policies of the globalists or the internationalists, we have to be willing to give any nationalist a listen. What will the global utopians do now? Might an EU member country like Italy pull out, cease to be a part of the World Economic Forum and the New World Order destruction of the world population? What's going to happen? What we can expect is lots of squealing and shouting, the oldest play in the totalitarian playbook. When you can't stop a populist candidate, or you just want to shut down any challenger, you weaponize language. Associate them with any label or name that has a bad smell, so that the uninformed masses will look the other way, might not be tempted to listen. The thing about that is there are fewer and fewer uninformed masses these days, and that's one thing that we would prayerfully be attempting to remedy here, is informing more people about these things that are extremely important. So when we listen to Meloni speak, her speeches are no doubt inspirational. And assuming her movement is genuinely organic and not some type of controlled opposition, we should expect, right? If it's not controlled opposition, what we should see happening pretty soon is some faction or factions of the Western hegemony or the bloodline banking families, those who have power and control the levers of the world. We should see soon these people will get to her and they will do what they can to destroy any chance of her making a difference. Listen carefully to what Joe Biden, this Biden administration, listen to what they say about her. If they speak in some way in support of her, I'd be a little worried. But if they're taking the hard line against her and they're using terms like fascist, like we'll see in just a minute, there's a good chance that this is possibly something real. In the comments under one of the articles I'm reading about Meloni earlier this week, about the conservative Italian prime minister, about her victory, one person wrote, "Celebrating victory by fascists, boy, that's sad. This is not a great day for Italy, but it's what they voted in because that's democracy." You hear what's being said there. Democracy's dangerous because democracy lets someone like a fascist be elected. That's what comes next. The establishment will do whatever it can to limit or render this new movement powerless. Article from Politico this week. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen fires a threatening statement regarding the shift to the right in Italy. I'll tell you her statement and then I'll play it for you. She says, "My approach is that whatever democratic government is willing to work with us, that means do what we say." She says, we're working together. But if things go in a difficult direction, that means if the party they want in office doesn't get in. If things go in a difficult direction, I've spoken about Hungary and Poland. We have tools. It's kind of like if you have ways, they have ways. That's what she's saying. Let's listen to her comments here.
We'll see. If things go in a difficult direction, I've spoken about Hungary and Poland. We have tools. If things go in the right direction, and people as a body that is always, where always governments have to be accountable to, play an important role.
Okay, so what did she mean there? We have tools. They have built-in policies to take care of any movements. Should there be an election of someone that they don't approve of to one of their member nations, well, they have ways to make that person powerless. That's exactly what you would expect, right? Out of a globalist, out of a totalitarian mindset. That's what it is. Let's just be honest about it, right? If COVID taught us anything, if their actions and responses to the pandemic taught us anything, it's that they are totalitarians. To be sure, there's something probably therapeutic totalitarianism, which is more of a communitarian, no less total government and slavery for the masses. But it's a subtle slavery. It's the kind of slavery where most of the people don't realize they're enslaved. But they certainly are. So if Meloni is far right, well, does that mean that Ursula von der Leyen, does that mean that the European Union is far left? Well, clearly that's what this means. But aren't we told that globalists are always in support of free and fair elections? That's what they say. But that's not true, is it? We can see here that that's not true. Italian politicians have asked the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, not to intervene in domestic politics after she gave this warning that they have the tools to deal with this. Let me translate this tweet so you can see it. This is a clear reference to the ability of the European Commission to cut funds allocated to member countries when they are deemed to be violating the rules of law, or the rule of law. Now, she mentioned Poland and Hungary. I'll tell you in just a moment what happened, what they did to Poland and Hungary and why, which is likely what they'll be doing to Italy as well. Von der Leyen's remark provoked the ire of multiple candidates during their final stretch. One of them here was Matteo Salvini. He heard this statement about, we have tools. Salvini said, what is this, a threat? This is shameful arrogance. And he asked the European Union president to respect the free, democratic, and sovereign vote of the Italian people. Well, she will, as long as they vote for the person she supports. Also, once again, another tweet here says, this video must make us react. For the first time publicly, the President of the European Union, in front of the American flag no less, directly threatens a sovereign nation as to the choice of its vote. Threatening reprisals, threatening action if they don't do what they're told. Matteo Salvini also said on Italian TV that if anyone in Brussels thinks of cutting the funds that belong to Italy because the League, the right or the nationalists, have won the election, then we have to rethink this whole European Union thing because this is institutional bullying. So how about that? It's on, folks. It is on like Donkey Kong. It's going on out there. There seem to be legitimate movements, populist, conservative uprisings, and the various global multipolar factions now are working to shut them down as fast as they can. These comments are coming from someone in a tremendous position of authority. She has control of the European Union, all the member nations there. So it's disturbing. And you can judge for yourself what the European Union imposed on Hungary and Poland because of who the people elected. Last week, the Commission, the European Union Commission, proposed a $7.5 billion funds cut, or cut of the funds that are normally allocated to Hungary. Now, this is how nations are controlled today. The IMF giving money out to nations, getting them addicted to the flow of money. The way it used to be done in developing nations, or we've got a little sun coming in there. The way it used to be done, or the way it still is done in developing or less wealthy or poorer nations, is that you get the leaders. You get a nation in debt. This is right out of the Economic Hitman, Confessions of an Economic Hitman book. If you read that book, and you can find out how this works, how nations are conquered today without bullets, without any violence. It's done financially. Get these nations in debt, and soon you own everything. You own the nations. And now they're doing this to larger, traditional nation states like, well, Poland, Hungary, Italy. The BBC News reports that Hungary and Poland lose EU funding due to backsliding on core values. Backsliding on core values. So-called democratic standards. The European Court of Justice, so they took the European Union to court about this, and the court ruled that complying with the rule of law was a condition of enjoying membership in the EU. The rule of law, as defined by the European Union, of course. The EU member states signed up to common values such as rule of law and solidarity, and the EU must be able to defend those values. So you can see that if you don't support all of these gender identity movements or these all of the standards that Meloni was standing for. I'll read them to you here again. These her main points: the natural family, for one thing. These reproductive rights. She's anti-abortion. Things like that. So if you stand against that and for something like the natural family, you're going to lose your funding. You're not going to be, if you elect someone like that. Both countries, EU member states signed up to common values such as rule of law. They say they have to be able to defend it. Both countries have been investigated for undermining the independence of courts, media, and non-governmental organizations. And both are key recipients of EU funding. Poland was ordered last year to shut down a disciplinary chamber for judges because it was not independent, while Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has been accused of curbing the rights of minorities. Now, these are two conservative leaders. That's why this is relevant. That's what's happening in Europe. The EU has already frozen COVID recovery money worth 36 billion euros for Poland and 7 billion euros for Hungary. And they're looking to cut even more funds. So there you go. This is how they fight back. Now let's deal with the language a little bit more here as we're getting down to the home stretch here. Let's deal with the language. Now this is going to be, I think this is going to be a fun part of the show. Let's look at a couple of headlines before we get there. Here's Piers Morgan talking about Meloni. Let's listen to this for just a second. It's interesting to hear what, obviously an establishment guy, what's he saying about it?
What I think is really fascinating is how this whole shift is being categorized as a shift to the far right. Whereas if you look at this woman, Giorgia Meloni, who's become Italy's first prime minister, I wouldn't categorize her as far right at all. I would call her a fiscal conservative. In fact, bordering on moderate. So I think this is a classic tendency from the left to over-demonize anyone who is conservative and to brand them immediately far right and sort of make out this is some stigma to beat them with. The reason that she's won and the reason why you're seeing a lot of this sweeping through Scandinavia and other parts of Europe is I think that people are fed up with what they perceive to be a very ultra-woke left agenda, which is not addressing their real concerns. And in particular, whether it's in Sweden or Italy or other countries in Europe, on the issue of illegal immigration. And I think that that is the one issue which you can trace to all these countries which have moved to the right. There is a belief by the people of these countries that their governments have not been addressing this, what they perceive to be a very serious issue.
So you have to ask, you just have to wonder, has the ultra woke agenda, has that been a play? Has that been a play to cause this reaction? Because Hegelian dialectic, that is, it's not only a description of how history plays out, it's also a method by which those with the power to do it cause things to change and bend history or the future in their direction. You have to ask it, right? You have to, if you're being careful, you have to ask that question. So here comes the language. Fascist everywhere. Biden says extreme MAGA philosophy is like semi-fascism. It's not just Trump, it's in Italy. It's in Italy as well. Biden says what we're seeing now is either the beginning of the death knell of an extreme MAGA philosophy. It's not just Trump, it's an entire philosophy that underpins the, I'm going to say something like semi-fascism. Biden said that if Democrats lose midterm elections, Republicans would go about wiping out choice across the board, right? Wiping out choice. That's what they call abortion choice. Who is more about taking your ability to choose away from you? It's these people that are calling everybody fascist. So pay attention to what Biden is going to say and what the White House has already said about neo-fascism in Italy. Let's listen to Joy Reid, MSNBC. That'll give you a good idea of what the White House is going to say. They are in lockstep.
100 years ago, Benito Mussolini came to power in Italy. He led a march on Rome, flanked by the fascist armed squads known as Black Shirts, in a deliberate show of force designed to intimidate Parliament, seizing total control over the Italian government. That march occurred in October 1922, meaning we are just weeks away from the 100th anniversary of this infamous coup d'etat. And yet, this week, neo-fascism won big in Italy, with Giorgia Meloni poised to form Italy's most right-wing government since the Second World War. Meloni is the leader of the hard-right Brothers of Italy, a party with roots in the post-war neo-fascist Italian social movement. The party's flag features a tricolor flame popularized by Mussolini. The election poses a danger not just to Italy, but to the rest of the world as well. At a time when here in America, we debate often and loudly about the creeping rise and national security threat of fascism and the dangers posed by cult-like leaders who rise to power spewing racist and xenophobic beliefs.
She means Donald Trump, folks. She means anybody out there who doesn't spout their rhetoric. So there you go. There's more of the narrative for you. Now let's deal with that narrative just a little bit. What should we think? All right, it's a fact. Right? It's a fact. It's real. The party that she belongs to can be shown to have its provenance from the National Fascist Party of what was it? 20-year period there in the teens, 20s, 30s, World War I and II. World War II specifically, where Mussolini had an alliance with Adolf Hitler. But what do we do with that? Does that mean she's spoiled? And she obviously she's a fascist, and she is just like Mussolini, right? Let's try that. Let's just test that argument and see if it works. Let's listen to Cenk Uygur. I hope I say his name. I don't mean to say his name wrong. I haven't heard it said much, so Cenk Uygur. Could be Uyghur, but it's, you tell me, U-Y-G-U-R. Tell me. But let's listen to what Cenk from the Young Turks, by the way. Democrats for sure. Progressive liberals, absolutely. Let's listen to what they have to say, and then let's test and try their logic on their own paradigm.
She's a racist, she's this, she's that. And I thought, wow, this is somebody who I can relate to because they're doing the same thing about me.
Oh, this Meloni chick's a fascist. She's just like me for real.
No, it's amazing what they say, man. I mean, okay, so let's start at the beginning when she says, I looked up this Italian and I thought for sure she was going to say bird, like Austin Powers. I looked up this Italian bird, Meloni, that they're talking about. And I couldn't figure out what she's for. They're just calling her fascist and stuff. Well, there's a reason why they're calling her fascist. It's in the articles. It's because her party used to be a neo-fascist party. They're not picking it out of the thin air. It was literally a neo-fascist party earlier. She's like, I don't know why they're calling her fascist. Well, I don't know. Why don't you read?
Why don't you read, people? Are you just ignorant or something? Why don't you just read? Don't you understand why they're calling her a fascist? It's just that simple. Okay, let's apply that logic to Cenk Uygur himself. what we want to do here is, it's not going to be my words. I'm going to use the words of Carol Swain, Dr. Carol Swain. So the question we're asking is, well, you can see clearly that Giorgia Meloni's party was connected to a fascist party in the past. So clearly she's just like Mussolini. She's just like him. Okay. When you think about racial equality and civil rights, which political party in the United States comes to mind? Is it the Republicans or the Democrats? Most people would probably say, yes, it's the Democrats. Chink there, he would say, yes, me, I stand for those things. And I wouldn't question him. I'm sure he does stand for those things in his heart. But that answer is incorrect. Since its founding in 1829, the Democratic Party has fought against every major civil rights initiative and has a long history of discrimination. The Democratic Party defended slavery. I need to rewind that. The Democratic Party defended slavery, started the Civil War, opposed Reconstruction. Look, if you have a problem with this, take it up with Carol Swain. I'm just reading her report to you. Democratic Party imposed segregation, perpetuated lynchings, and fought against the Civil Rights Act, the acts of the 1950s and 60s. In contrast, the Republican Party was found, and look, I'm not here to tell you that one or the other is the best and right. We try to stay out of political paradigm too much, but I'm clearly a conservative. There's just no question about it. I'm not trying to hide from that. I'm just trying to tell you that when it comes to political parties and the paradigm in our nation, yeah, it's better to take your own view on issues rather than just take a party line. So anyway, that said, they do work for the same outcomes in most of the important issues, that have to do with the direction of the country. But we're just testing the logic of Cenk Uygur here. Republican Party was founded in 1854 as an anti-slavery party. Its mission was to stop the spread of slavery into the new Western territories with the aim of abolishing it entirely. This effort, however, was dealt a major blow by the Supreme Court. In 1857, the Dred Scott case, the court ruled that slaves aren't citizens, that they're property. The 7 justices who voted in favor of slavery, they were obviously Republicans, all far-right, fascist, right? No, they were all Democrats. And 2 justices who dissented, both of them were Republicans. So during the end, now, because what you saw them doing there was pointing at, look at this American Republican. She's obviously a fascist too because she's supporting whatever. This is going to fall apart fast, as you'll see. During the era of Reconstruction, federal troops stationed in the South helped secure rights for the newly freed slaves. Hundreds of black men were elected to southern state legislatures as Republicans, and 22 black Republicans served in the U.S. Congress by 1900. The Democrats did not elect a black man to Congress until 1935. After Reconstruction ended, when the federal troops went home, Democrats roared back into power in the South. They quickly reestablished white supremacy across the region with measures like black codes, laws that restricted the ability of blacks to own property and run businesses. And they imposed poll taxes and literacy tests used to subvert the black citizens' right to vote. And how did they enforce all of this? With terror, right? With terror. With subversion. A few decades later, the only serious congressional opposition to the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964 came from Democrats. 80% of Republicans in Congress supported the bill. Less than 70% of Democrats did. Democratic senators filibustered the bill for 75 days until Republicans mustered the few extra votes needed to break the tie. So today, the Democratic Party prospers on the votes of the very people it spent much of its history oppressing. oppressing. That's the word. Oppressing. That's the definition of what they stood for. So when you think about racial equality and civil rights, which political party should come to mind? Oh, it's clearly those evil far-right fascist Republicans, right? Not even close. And this is Carol Swain, professor of political science and law at Vanderbilt University. Take it up with her. So what was it that Cenk Uygur was implying here? That Giorgia Meloni she's just like Mussolini. If that's true, then Cenk Uygur is also a racist. He's a racist just like the party he belongs to was for generations. Cenk Uygur clearly is not in favor of civil rights, equality. Clearly he wants to suppress all people of color, doesn't want them to have property, perhaps wants them to be property. Right? Is that fair for me to say of him? Of course it's not. I'm sure he doesn't believe those things, but his logic, you see, what they're doing here isn't reporting. It's fomenting emotion. It's got nothing to do with the truth. These people are liars. They're lying with lies. That's what they're doing. Right? You heard in the little video we put out very early this morning, you heard Joe Scarborough from MSNBC saying, calling these people fascists all over the place, and that's what fascists do. Right? And he said, well, I'm afraid this is what liars do. It's not wrong to call someone a liar when they're actually sitting there. They're caught in one. So just to set all that straight, if anyone, if you're interested in this issue and you're wondering, well, they're calling her a fascist, I don't know what to do. Well, here's a little help for you. Calling her a fascist because Benito Mussolini lived in early in the 20th century, it's fallacious. It's a fallacious argument, and it's not helpful. Nothing Cenk Uygur or the Young Turks are doing, it's not helpful. What they're doing is exactly what we told you that we will not do here, and that's tell people what they want to hear. To continue to feed people a line that they'll keep coming back for because it's like a product. It's like it's a commodity that they sell. It's called leftism. It's called emotion. It's called get under our flag. It's not about the truth at all. Anyway, so there's that. But now also in this context here, Giorgia Meloni used some quotes from G.K. Chesterton. All right, this was interesting as we look at the dumpster fire here on Twitter. Oops, too far. Let me show you what we found here. So she used a quote from G.K. Chesterton in her speech earlier. She said, at the end of her speech, she said, fires will be kindled. She's talking about the culture and where we are. Chesterton wrote this about 100 years ago. He said, fires will be kindled to testify that 2 and 2 make 4. Swords will be drawn to prove that leaves are green in summer. That means, plainly, that truth will be contested. Severely contested. Whether or not a man is a man and a woman is a woman, swords will be drawn. Right? And that's exactly where we are. He could see then the direction of this movement. And of course, well, anything that the fascist says, we've got to go ahead and, well, let's see. Right here, someone says this starts off. This person here says, your necessary reminder, this is your reminder that G.K. Chesterton was a reactionary, a fascist sympathizer, and an anti-Semite. Okay, so G.K. Chesterton, you saying that about him, so this lady is all of those things because she quoted him. But is G.K. Chesterton all of those things? Well, he says it's really not surprising that she quoted him. She said fascists always speak with a wink and a nod, and gives a. And here we go. Some of the people say, okay, here are, if the fascists are going to quote Chesterton, then so am I. Chesterton said, capitalism is really a very unpleasant word. It's also a very unpleasant thing. How is that fascist? Right? Is he wrong? Or when capitalism is informed, when the underlying worldview of capitalism is anything but the Christian worldview, it gets ugly fast, of course. It can be extremely unpleasant. That doesn't mean you throw it out. That means you bring back the Christian worldview. This person says, Italian PM quotes, theorist for the fascist movement. Right? Because obviously, didn't you realize that all the greatest fascists quoted G.K. Chesterton, right? That's you knew that, right? No. So they try to take what... this is something called chronological snobbery. In other words, what these people are doing, that they're trying to say, okay, G.K. Chesterton, I think he met Benito Mussolini once, so he lived in the same time. So therefore, the new Italian prime minister is a fascist. That doesn't even prove that Chesterton is a fascist. Chronological snobbery means that you are applying your 20th century lenses, and you're claiming that you can see perfectly clearly G.K. Chesterton's ideology from where he's sitting in time, before the rise of fascism. That's where he sits, before all that rose, before it all played out. Before Mussolini was hung by his feet in the streets after it was all over. Folks, the left has no argument. These progressives, the globalists, the New World Order faction, I know there are people from the right in there too. Just we're not going there now. We're focusing on this left-right divide that is dying, and we have to resist getting caught up in this and understand what the new terminology is. It's nationalists versus internationalists. It's globalists versus patriots, if you want to use the term. More about that later, or perhaps in a subsequent show. But this comes from G.K. Chesterton's quote comes from Heretics. He wrote many pieces for newspapers and magazines back in his day. Heretics is a collection of 20 essays published in 1905. 1905, okay? You can't tell me that G.K. Chesterton is supporting fascism. This thing that they're calling fascism didn't come about and exist until, 15, 20, 25 years later? Chronological snobbery. Be on the lookout for it. It's a common tactic. Chesterton is writing to respond or refute various personalities. Now listen to the worldview Chesterton's writing from. But the topics he debates are universal. He quotes at length and argues extensively against atheists, delivers diatribes about his close personal friend and intellectual rival, George Bernard Shaw, as well as diatribes against Friedrich Nietzsche, H.G. Wells, Rudyard Kipling, and an array of other major intellectuals of his day, many of whom he knew personally. The topics he touches upon range from cosmology to anthropology to soteriology. That's the doctrine or the study of salvation. He's writing from the Christian worldview. Of course we need to attack him. Can't let them get away with that. We can't let a Christian quote a Christian. That's not possible. Now, somebody's going to write in and say Chesterton was a Catholic. Okay, that's fine. Once again, don't get caught up in chronological snobbery, thinking that you know what Catholicism was to him back in the day. Be careful. Just be careful with black and white thinking like that. He also writes about syncretism. the idea of bringing multiple religions in to create one from it, or muddling multiple religions together. He writes about of the vague modern people who are vague, are not very specific about their beliefs anymore. He writes about social Darwinism and eugenics. Right? Chesterton writes about and in criticism of eugenics and the arrogance and misanthropy of the European intelligentsia. Together with orthodoxy, Heretics, his book Heretics, is regarded, or the book that was made, Heretics, is regarded as central to his body of work on moral theology. I was going to read some of his quotes there, but I think we'll hold that for another time as well. So just to make it clear, the new language, folks, is it left, right? You know, it's the same darn bird, right? Is it really that simple? Are we being helpful if we oversimplify that much? So in the interest of having our conversation be relevant, in the interest of saying something that's useful to you as a viewer or a listener, we want to bring our rhetoric up to date, up to the minute. So that means we need to upgrade some of our terminology. So we don't really need to be talking in terms of left-right divide anymore. Seems clear the days of left-right politics are over. The global totalitarian movement, disguised as a utopian revolution to save the earth and create equality for all human beings on earth, is forcing a new multipolar world order with corporations making the rules via governance rather than nation states working for the will of the people. It was France that gave the world the concepts of left-right paradigm with its origins in the French Revolution of 1789. Supporters of the royal veto, now this is where your left-right terminology came from. 1789. Supporters of the royal veto stood on the right of the National Assembly, and the opponents stood on the left. Over the following 2 centuries, left and right became the central philosophical divide, terminology for the divide, in Western politics. Now France is leading the way. We're out of Italy and into France now. France is leading the way in destroying this paradigm and modeling new politics. This according to Financial Times, financialtimes.com, ft.com. In the first round of the French presidential election back in April, the traditional parties collapsed as an example of how the world's political state of play is shaping up. For example, Emmanuel Macron is a passionate advocate of deeper European integration. Marine Le Pen, his opposition, wants to unravel the current European Union and turn it into a Europe of national states, just like Giorgia Meloni was talking about. Le Pen is usually labeled as a far-right candidate. She rejects this, insisting that there is no more left and right. The real divide is between the patriots and the globalists. Macron also says this. He says that he is neither left nor right. No, he's an opportunist. Most of them are. But he says the new, quote, the new political split is between those who are afraid of globalism and those who see globalism as an opportunity. Now, that's a politician speaking for you right there. That is a schooled and seasoned politician. There is no real opposition, he just said. Typically, globalist is used as a term of abuse, right? In a speech at Avignon, Marine Le Pen accused globalists of treating the French as rootless consumers, like Giorgia Meloni did as well, rather than as dignified human creatures. So this kind of rhetoric is now a trademark of the nationalist right around the world. Now, what we have to do is get used to this term nationalist and far right and not feeling the reaction to it that the media wants you to have to it, right? So the left and the right, no longer relevant. It's really now about those who are for individual liberties and those who are collectivists. Now that's typically been the left-right divide, but it's broken down now. It's starting to crystallize into what this new global paradigm is going to be. Nationalists and internationalists. For instance, influential political theorists in Vladimir Putin's Russia, Alexander Dugin, Konstantin Malofeev, have frequently denounced globalism as a plot against the Russian nation and culture. Right? So if Russia sees itself as a sovereign nation and not as a part of a global union of any kind, then of course they're going to try to take it out. That can't exist. And so you might see exactly what we see happening in the world right now. So it's globalists versus nationalists, if you want to get it down to two terms that are more accurate. All right, so in the interest of time, and so that we can get you a nice full report on the rest of the content we have for this story, next time we're going to get into narrative analysis. We're going to listen to Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand, setting the stage for what's coming. And we're going to look at several articles that support this narrative of far-right fascists and how they're portrayed in the press. We've got a few articles to show you there, that things that have happened over the past week or two that definitely show you that the narrative is at work. Patriots versus globalists replaces the left-right divide. We'll look at Jacinda next time. This is her speaking at the UN, and all of her faction definitely fully masked up, because you can't be too careful, right? When you're sitting in a huge room that's well ventilated, you can't be too careful. Some of the articles we're going to be looking at right here. There you go. Looking at what happened in Texas at this drag bingo at a church. Barring white people from getting certain vaccines seems to be a story. We'll look at this, the rhetoric of the climate change rhetoric. Ultimately, it's mass behavior change. They want to develop a new common sense through subtle techniques of engagement. They want to get it to the point where the indoctrination is so plain and clear that facts are just taken for granted, and it's like a brand, a trusted brand that can be sold. Right? The future ain't what it used to be. And of course, after that, we will, or as a part of our next report for you, we will look at big tech and the erasure of history, how they're trying to knock out. That's what all totalitarian regimes in history have ever done. When they get power, they wipe out the history. They call it year one. We have no history. We're starting over. Check out all the totalitarian, the communist regimes of the 20th century. This is how they all operated. Destroyed the history of the people and started, or appropriated what they wanted to for themselves. And then we'll finish up with the left's war on history. This global movement we see to appropriate history or to override it, to mitigate its effect, to essentially wipe away real history. That includes the Bible, because it's not just a war on history. What they're waging is a war on God, and we'll show you exactly how that's happening. We'll tell you the methods of their war on God, how to see it, how to think about it. We're going to share some information from this book, We Have Been Harmonized, Life in China's Surveillance State, because the first chapter of this book talks about language control, the commandeering of language, hijacking of language, right? The idea that it's not really, it's intimidation. What they really shoot for is ultimately intimidation, shame. You need to be shamed and intimidated into coming along, and ultimately everyone will participate in our norms. We'll share some of that with you. What is actually happening right now in China, the Chinese communist, under Chinese communist tactics, creating or building an order as opposed to shepherding truth, discipling souls, subjective versus objective, man-centered versus eternal. So we'll share some of that with you next time. And ultimately, if we have time after that, we're going to talk about 3 big points of God's common grace, because the only reason that our world is cohesive in any way, that we can have any freedom, that anything works at all, that we have air to breathe, is because God's common grace. And we'll talk about that. We'll give you the 3 biggest points, God's common grace, and we'll look at, once again, the four steps to subvert any country or any community or people group, so that we're clear on all that. So join us next time for Armor of Truth Live number 198. We're going to continue this conversation then, and we look forward to giving you a report on this the next time we see you. Right here. We're going to go see this tonight, and we'll let you know what we find out. Going to be interesting, all right? All right. God bless you, my friends. We'll see you next time.
Well, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth Live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.